This is CareShift with me, Safik Bilakanti, and I'm so excited about our guest today. Othman Laraki is the co-founder of Color Health, a company transforming population health through proactive screening, genomics, and large-scale public health infrastructure. Color has raised funding from renowned investors including General Catalyst, Kindred Ventures, Emerson Collective, Khosla Ventures, and Viking Global Investors. They have also signed insane contracts such as with the UC Systems, Memorial Sloan Kettering, which is one of the top cancer institutes in the world, and many more. Color is currently valued at $4.6 billion, and before Color, Othman was the co-founder of Mixer, which was acquired by Twitter. Othman, it's amazing to have you on, so thank you for being here today.
Matt, thanks for having me. It's good to see you.
Yeah, I wanted to go right into it because there's so much I want to kind of discover with Color and your kind of advice to founders. Like, many founders default, they build something and then they kind of sell. And you kind of flip that in Color where you spoke to specific partners and then you figured out exactly what to build. How was it selling to these huge kind of, for example, you at EC System and winning these huge deals like the massive breast cancer study? How did that go, for example?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that honestly, sometimes it's kind of like you did the right thing when you've kind of made all the wrong choices initially, and
Yeah.
then you learn. But I do think like especially like in industries like in healthcare where it's these are very deal based in a way where I think one thing that's really tough as an entrepreneur is when you don't have a high kind of like feedback, like a fast feedback loop with the market. To understand whether you're onto something and how the market kind of like pulls in new solutions or new ideas. I think especially people who come from like say consumer or internet world, like you have a very, very rapid and natural feedback loop, right? Like you put something out, people see it, either they use it or they don't, right? Like, and you get very rapid inside information, right? Like whether it's kind of, all the viral consumer loops, with Facebook and Twitter's in the day, et cetera. Whereas with more kind of like enterprise types of businesses, that feedback loop is much slower and also just kind of confusing because it's, you're talking with like multi-party transactions or, like in healthcare, for example, right? Like you have this kind of separation of like your customer is kind of fractured because it's kind of like you're trying to serve the patient, right? Like, the business of healthcare is health for people, but oftentimes the economic buyer is not the individual, the beneficiary, but, big employer or a plan, right? Like who holds the wallet or the government. But then, and also you have the actual decision maker, oftentimes is a clinician. And so you're getting signal from all of them. And sometimes things work or they don't, but it's kind of confusing to understand like where it's coming from and so on. And I think one of the things that happens in these cases is that especially if you came from like a high, like I did from consumer products, you initially start off with your widget, like you build something you think makes sense and it's good for people and so on. And you just keep trying to sell that thing and pounding your head against the wall and trying to convince everyone, like, if you walk into a doctor's office or to a doctor or to, an insurance company and try to sell them like why it's good for patients, they kind of care, but they kind of don't really, right? Like it's kind of like their real business is not patient health. Like that is not how they make money. And so like the law of natural selection in business like causes them to, they'll pay lip service, but the reality is like their decisions are driven by the business prerogatives when all said and done. And I think in businesses also where there is kind of like this social benefit, ethical dimension, there's a lot of confusing double talk where they will talk like you think that their the patient health is the top priority, but it really isn't based on their actions. And so like one of the things I feel like over time with Color, like, maybe to give listeners a sense of like, I think one of the things that Color's done over time that's been quite interesting and unique is that, we've done really big partnerships with, for example, some of the biggest research studies across the entire University of California system. That was actually I think our first kind of like major deal. Like we've done multi-$100 million deals with the NIH, very large government programs in the public sector with, departments of public health in like California, Massachusetts, a bunch of other states. We've sold hundreds of millions of dollars worth of services to major employers as well. And I think over time, when things have worked, it has been by, yes, we have the things that we built that we think are valuable for people and so on, but it's really taking the time to understand and spend time with the actual buyer whoever is holding that wallet at the time to get to what is really the driver of their incentives and what the solution they need. And, seeing if what you have actually matches that and you can actually deliver to them something that's unique, but it's repackaging it in a way that really addresses their incentives and their needs and their requirements. And I think sometimes like entrepreneurs really don't do that, right? Like in our case, like we started off, I mean, today Color is a very different company. We run the world's first virtual cancer clinic nationally. So the company's evolved a lot over time. When we started off, we were a genetic testing company. And I think it would have been a mistake to just stay thinking, okay, like our goal is to sell genetic tests and trying to convince like all these buyers just buy genetic tests. Like at the end of the day, that is not what they're actually trying to buy. So taking the time to understand that and address it, I think was very fundamental to us, growing and succeeding as a company.
So your first massive deal with like the UC systems, how did you crack into there? Like what was that process like? Kind of, do you find a couple champions to help you get to the key stakeholders?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I mean, I think it's a numbers game, when all said and done. Like, by now I think I've forgotten like all of the shots that didn't land, right? Like you just kind of, you look back at history, it looks like linear, but it's like you forget all the branches that died, but I think a few key things, I mean, because we were at the time focusing on scientists and researchers as a key partner slash customer, our credibility in on the scientific front was very important. And we took the time to really get to know and understand and gain the respect of some of the top scientists in the world. And so for example, the scientists who, um, you know, really established a connection between genetics and cancer, Dr. Mary Claire King. She used to be at Berkeley and now she's at University of Washington. She's an amazing scientist, very well respected across, the entire field. And she's, we took the time to really understand her science and her work and also demonstrate that we were, for a lot of these folks, right, like their reputation is one of their most valuable assets. And so really taking the time to establish our credibility on the scientific front and showing that we were willing to go the distance from a technical rigor standpoint. Like I think in spaces like healthcare where it's very deep and kind of challenging and complicated, sometimes people get excited about the innovation and want to kind of like cut corners from a quality and diligence standpoint. And that oftentimes like just, comes back to bite you sooner or later. It's like there's all these, actually we were starting like as Color was kind of getting rolling and et cetera. It was like right when Theranos was blowing up, and so like basically, every conversation people would be like, so how do we know about like Theranos, right? Like, and it's like, well, let's sit down and like talk through the science and go through and we were, like really making sure that we were not over promising, that, we had our act together. And so like that really made a big difference, that we were showing up with a lot of depth and caring about the fundamentals. And then to the prior point, like I think the realizing too, like what were they actually trying to buy? Like sometimes people are like, oh, at the time they're like, we're trying to buy tests, right? Like that's what they thought they were trying to buy and how they talked about it. But in reality, realize, for example, for big studies like this, actually the test doesn't stand by itself. Like you need a clinical service around it. Like getting someone to spit in a tube or give you a blood sample and running in a lab is part of the problem, but you need to be able to really do the analytics, do the software well, generate all the data from it, manage the patients properly. So do the genetic counseling. We were the first to manage people like digitally so that like they can sign up, they can get their results. So we kind of built this holistic service around it that people still call the test. That's what they kind of like the pointer, right? Like was kind of to this like, this label that was familiar to people, but with it came all these other things that actually made it work properly for people, right? Like, and so in some ways the ergonomics of what we were offering were much better than anyone else. And to this day, that's actually still very core to the culture and the approach that Color has, which is like, at the end of the day, a lot of healthcare is gated on just the simplicity of access. And so much of healthcare is just inconvenient and bloated with cost because people sell these like individual components, but they don't work by themselves, right? Like, and so selling the value, like what is the actual thing you need and want to buy is I think something that's like always worth like really thinking deeply about and working deliberately towards. So
Did that same process work kind of like signing the world leader, like a world leader, like Memorial Sloan Kettering? Like, did that same kind of process work to getting them, or was it like a different strategic kind of pull that you had to go towards?
I think it's actually a very common thread across all of these. So yeah, what you're alluding to is we have a very deep partnership with Memorial Sloan Kettering, where it's one of the like the top cancer name in the world, and one of the very most respected and deep cancer centers in the U.S. And there too, for example, we work very closely with them to serve major employers in the Northeast, so the entire like tri-state area. And there too, I think first of all the fact that color, even though we're very tech forward and very kind of oriented around access and simplicity and so on, is very still has a very strong reputation around the kind of the rigor behind our work and doing things the right way and so on. So like really ensuring that we're protecting not only our brand but that of our that of our partners and customers, I think was very, very important. But then there too, it comes back to that what is the true kind of institutional goal and need. And if you look at, some of these like major cancer centers, what are they amazing at? Like they are amazing at treating cancers, right? Like, so they have the top oncologists and surgeons in the world who can, really provide a very differentiated chance to, survive one of the biggest like diseases someone can have in their lifetime, but they don't operate in a vacuum, right? Like ultimately, when they need patients to come in, they need patients, like it makes a big difference whether people are referred rapidly. It makes a difference whether patients have the right workup when they're coming in. So when we do things that make them better at their job and their service, while still kind of like we're just focusing on, their competitive differentiation, I think is the type of thing that really helps those kinds of partnerships as well.
And yeah, for these partnerships, whether that be for MSK or for the UC systems, did it start off as like a pilot and then kind of go into a actual full blown, a customer, or like what were the kind of steps in that when you first got into the door? You had to show specific KPIs to them. Like what was that steps like?
Yeah, I'm not a very big fan of pilots, to be totally honest. I feel like, especially in in general, like pilots are, you do 99% of the work, but without the commitment, and you end up wasting a lot of time, but not like getting the full deal done in a way. Our general preference and orientation, it's in some ways kind of interesting. I think we've done very few pilots, actual pilots. What we have done though is like structuring partnerships in a way that, assume a growth trajectory, right? Like, well, where both parties have, optionality to deepen and dial it up, but where the V0 needs to stand on its own, like needs to make sense for everyone involved. Because I think sometimes what happens with pilots is that they will gravitate towards something that maybe is easy to ask for but isn't above the activation energy of really delivering value. And so I feel like even especially right now with all the AI kind of hype, et cetera, you're seeing a lot of companies who sell to health systems that, have like dozens of pilots all over the place and et cetera. And like, in a way, I feel like these are fake successes in many cases. And again, like there are ways to start. I think when they're the right way in some ways, sometimes are when they are like very clear exit criteria. And you actually, but I think the key thing there is like, is that,
So a lot of features, they kind of come with the process of I have to get a pilot and kind of show ROI immediately before I can, officially get the deal with a specific health system or hospital. Because then I can show, okay, this is actually going to prove to them, we're gonna do X, Y, Z. Depending on what we've kind of told them as the selling points, because a lot of times they kind of get skeptical that a lot of health systems probably won't adopt their tool without a pilot. But yeah, as you mentioned, relationships are super, super important and crucial as you
yeah,
kind of.
like, this is kind of a, maybe I guess in today's world, a little bit maybe politically incorrect analogy, but it's like it reminds me of I used to have one of my early kind of professors or mentors in startup land. He used to always talk about the ham omelet, where the chicken is involved, but the pig is fully committed. you like sometimes you have these kind of like things where it's like, the startup, obviously you want to do anything you can and you're fully committed and like you're, all in and burning the boats to make these things happen. And the others are like, kind of involved, but it's like you want people to have an equal level of commitments in these things.
Right. I mean, with all of that though, like with administrators, like, top execs in these hospitals, they have so much, I guess, so many opportunity, like so many tools that they can assess, right? Like competition is endless now, where like one specific sector has like 8 different competitors, and then they can assess each one. How
Yeah.
do you kind of know or kind of prove, you know, we are the ones that you should select?
I mean, like, I don't think it's just it's not like because I think like sometimes the takeaway is like, it's all about relationships. Like, I mean, the reality too is like, you know, we have a lot of good relationships with a lot of folks but I never expect or want anyone to do something irrational because of the relationship in some sense. Like, you don't want people to act against their interests because that just doesn't end up adding up over time anyways. Right. Like, I think the thing to realize is like all the relationships do is that they help you get the right conversation sooner. And sometimes like you're given more the benefit of the doubt. Whereas when you show up without a relationship, you just have to prove it and be willing to be like, hey, like, look, I think sometimes like, and I have this issue, honestly, sometimes I'm like, when, sometimes like when people are like, if we just show up without a relationship and they're like, well, who are you guys? Like, you need to prove yourself and you're like, okay, like, give me a break. But like, the reality is like, that's fine. Like I respect that. And so there's kind of like, there's the kind of needing to prove yourself in a way that maybe sometimes relationships help, you know, over that. But I think the key there, like, for example, if you look at like, yeah, like today in the AI kind of hype phase, right? Like I've literally had folks be like, look, I get like 50 AI pitches and outreaches per week kind of thing, right? Like it's like your entire inbox. Actually, my inbox is full of like AI pitches like every single day. It's like, and the reality is like, yeah, sure. Like I'm sure like every board meeting in healthcare and corporate America today, like every meeting, there's like one of the topics like, okay, what's our AI strategy or something of that flavor. And so everyone feels the pressure to have an AI plan, if you will. And I think sometimes that creates kind of like fake motion in a way where like, I think right now there's a lot of like kind of random deals that happen. And I think I worry about getting swept up in that, where it's like eventually gravity or physics takes over. And so like, my orientation around this is like to really not show up. I feel like right now there's a lot of like, this resonance frequency around, you say AI and it's like, people perk up and listen more or whatever. But like, I would be careful about just selling into the hype cycle.
Mm.
Um, because that in some ways clouds judgment, but judgment doesn't necessarily stay clouded forever. And so I think it makes sense to use the opportunity, like, right, like when there's a window of opportunity, it's worth using it, but also not to smoke your own supply on that. And like thinking very critically about what is the value or solution you are selling. And I think AI is not a solution, right? Like it's not value in itself. It's like, so I think one mistake that sometimes folks make is that they sell the label, not what is the thing that like, so for example, if you look at like, one of the first like kind of healthcare AI related kind of arcs of success has been around all the scribes, AI scribes, and, whether it's, a bridge and, like others and
And
yeah. And so like, the interesting thing there is like, sure, like I think the AI kind of cycle has helped like kind of speed up that market, but probably the underlying core driver is that it is also helping hospitals bill and code better, right? And, that's actually what's, I think, driving pull and probably driving retention and staying power for those tools is that, like the easiest thing to sell people is revenue, right? Like everyone is always willing to buy margin positive revenue.
that's
And so, right. Like, so I think in many ways, like what scribes are selling, when you really boil out marketing, is actually they're selling better revenue realization. And so, whereas I think with all the discussions around AI right now is around like, there's been so much around like efficiency and cost cutting. And I think that's actually a harder sell to make because it's unclear really that those efficiency gains truly drop always to the bottom line. That like, it's kind of like there's a lot of like cost cutting is actually sometimes much harder to buy than more revenue.
There's so many like different like things that we have the common kind of, I guess, selling points that founders make, which is like, yeah, obviously the best one, generating more revenue, and that can come from like, CPT codes, for private practices or things like that. And then like, saving a lot of time and then saving money at the same time. It's like those common like things that are kind of there. And as you mentioned, like revenue is such a big pull. And I bet like in your case, you've seen that a lot in like selling to these kind of cancer clinics overall being like a big thing that these kind of top execs would be looking for, I imagine.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
Yeah. Yeah. Like what are a couple of like this overlooked psychological barriers that make cancer screening thrive and like mostly in the consumer models kind of aspect?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, when you think about things like cancer screening and prevention, like when you think about consumer mindset, right? Like, if you're us as individuals in our daily life, there are things that where you wake up, in your daily life, there is as a consumer, normal person, there's a pull for like you want more entertainment, you want things that are interesting, you want, things that make you feel or look better, right? Like, there's a pull to that, right? Like there are things like, for example, that's where like, like there, and where that overlaps with healthcare, right? Like, is that, it's like, there's an intrinsic consumer attraction to an iPhone, right? Like a new iPhone launches, right? Like it's a pull because as a consumer, normal human being, I want that device because it's awesome and it does all this. So, yeah, in healthcare, right? Like there are almost, maybe I'd break it down into like three big buckets, right? Like there's some healthcare that you have that consumer attraction to. That's kind of like, I would say that those are things more like weight loss, right? Like that's why, for example, the GLP-1 market is obviously both successful in the traditional clinical world, but also super successful in a direct consumer, environment. Not because like you're buying like long-term health as a consumer, you're buying like you want to, be, a better in your whatever image you have of
Yeah.
betterness, right? Like it's similar as like, hair loss things, et cetera. Acute care kind of like I have a pain problem that there's a pull towards, right? Like if you have something that hurts or that like, is impeding your daily life and so on, you obviously there's like a pressure there for like post consumers. And then there's a third bucket that is more like things that are important, but where there's no consumer pull, nor pain urgency. And I think that's all of the chronic care management, whether it's, your cardiometabolic health, diabetes, some mental health, I think is a bit like that. I think cancer screening and prevention is there where it's kind of like you have these things, but like, it's not like, I don't wake up every day and like, oh, I want to go get my cancer screening because I'm really excited about it. Right. Like, so, and I think the thing with all those things, that's an area where it has a huge impact on the health of a population, but it's like eating your vegetables. It's like subject to like procrastination and like, like the first one is more like by pastries, right? Like, you have a natural draw to the pastries, but you need to eat your vegetables to be healthy long term. And there's kind of a background, kind of like you do them for long term health, you do them for your family, you do them for et cetera. You do them also out of fear, right? Like, and so that's the constellation. But the things about that bucket is that they're incredibly influenced by friction. And that's where like why color, the way we work is so important is because if I make it a bit harder for you to do anything in that bucket three, your odds of doing it drop dramatically, right? And that's why societally it's so important to build these systems and these models. That's why employers, for example, they're investing so much, not just around screening prevention, but also like, getting people into treatment efficiently and so on is like, we see people that will have like literally cancer symptoms, but they're not acute yet, right? Like, and they will procrastinate on that for months while the cancer is progressing. And they will like be like, oh yeah, well, I called the doctor's office and they told me, yeah, it's going to take 3 months to go see them. So I'll wait. Because you don't have that like either acute pain or, consumer pull, but those are very consequential. And that's why this model that we built is so important and is working so well. Like we increased screening rates by about 70%, like adherence to screening guidelines. We cut in half the time it takes from getting a positive screen to confirming a diagnosis and initiating treatment. Those things have a bigger impact than almost any drug for cancer treatment that's been put on the market in the last, 20 years. That's why like it's that kind of a consumer oriented model is very important, is to increase that immediacy. Like if you make it a one click opportunity to get those things done, you dramatically shift that curve, right? Like and so that's kind of like the, one way to think about, this space. It's not, it really is almost like a few very different worlds in some sense when you kind of break it down.
No, it's very interesting because, I work a lot in the space of kidney disease where, there's chronic kidney disease where, and
Yeah.
that's so asymptomatic as well, kind of
Yeah.
like multiple things where it's like a lot of patients just don't really focus a lot on
Yeah.
many of the approaches. And then becomes too late to the point where they might have to go on dialysis at one point.
Yeah.
So it
Well,
becomes,
yeah, I believe that if I'm not mistaken, this was a stat I think from a few years ago. I'm assuming it's still correct, but like um, the majority of people who get put on dialysis do so as a result of showing up to the ER with kidney failure, and that is the first time
that,
they are having clinical intervention to manage their kidney disease, right? Like it's like literally nothing has happened. You have someone who might be progressing for 20 years. Nothing has been done or happened or diagnosed. And it's not until they
yeah.
are in the ER, and you're at the point where, you have 20 years of missed opportunity, and now you're going to pay through the nose and have a horrible lifestyle impact as a result, right? Like that's
It's very unfortunate, and and that kind of goes to the next point where there's a lot of big incentives for not for providers, but for a lot of payers to kind of go to at home monitoring as well in the RPM
Mhm.
setting and things like that. But as we kind of know, it kind of isn't. It kind of demotivates providers, or it's very, I guess, quote unquote, more or less profitable for providers. Has that been a situation that you've seen at Color where there's been a quite mismatch of kind of monitoring patients at home or just bringing them to the hospital or clinic? Like, has that played out?
Yeah, I do think that that is a real issue that's very structural and very fundamental, which is that because basically, the way in which we pay for healthcare, the transactional model, and people conflate it with the fee for service model, which is like, but I think it's a misuse of language that confuses thought in a way. Like when we have this kind of like fee for service versus value based care kind of conflict, but I think the fundamental issue is that the companies, in my mind, I think at the heart of it is that there are these companies that we call insurance providers, but where again, it's a terminology, cloud that messes with how people think of things, I think. But like these companies in many ways do this service that actually is really two different things. They are in some cases, the underwriter of risk. Like when people think insurance, like really, like literally, what is insurance? It's a collectivization of risk for high cost, unpredictable events. But then separately, they are also the transactional machinery to transact healthcare services and goods. And the way they've defined the transactional model, that what can you pay for and how you pay for it, I think is entirely designed around, I think their goals and incentives, not what the market actually wants to buy. What I mean by that is like, for example, right? Like most of like care is like, how do you pay for it? Like all the CPT codes are literally requiring doctors to waste time. Like, because it's like, okay, let's like, we pay for this CPT code if you spend 15 minutes, this CPT code if you use 30. And that's how value or transactions are denominated. And it makes it impossible to build and run services that sell the transactional value. And so instead, then they went and concocted like this value-based care edifice that creates big capitations that effectively just rebundle the entire thing to give you the same thing again. And so I think at the heart of the problem. It's not like, I think in some ways the clinician incentives is not, in my mind, I think the fault of the clinical world, because they literally don't have a way to get paid for selling higher order services, like your RPM example, right? Like at the end of the day, what do we want to buy, right? Like you want to buy someone who has, early stage CKD, right? Like, and, they need to be managed properly, holistically, right? Like it could be a combination of meds, of monitoring, of clinical oversight, of follow-ups. And, if I build a tool and a system that does it, using AI and kind of in very minimal clinical time, but actually does the work well, that's amazing. And you want the market to pay for that. But in our current structure, there is no way to do that. And people talk about VBC as a potential way to do that, but like that's actually complete BS. Like I think that totally has not worked. All it is like a different, I mean, like the fact that like, just last week when, you saw that, the MA rates were not going to take a step up and, all the big, insurance companies took a, 10, 20% cut of their market cap. Like it shows you where that value is captured. It's not captured in the value, in the clinical world. It's, in the middleman layers. And anyway, so that's so it's a kind of a bit of a rant about the current structure. I think that's at the heart of the problem. But that's also, for example, why we've chosen the model that we're doing with, big employers, pensions, unions, et cetera, because they are the true economic buyers of and have a long-term, relationship. And we don't do any transactional based services. Like we don't, do like, oh, for every time you talk to a doctor, it's like 15 minutes or whatever. It's like that, or like that is not how we designed our model. It's like, it is, we get the outcomes. What we're selling is people are up to date on their screenings. People are getting diagnosed faster. People are managed properly. That is the value that we're selling. And that's what we hold ourselves to. And so that's kind of like, I think, again, coming back to like understanding what people really need to buy and figuring out a way to sell it to them. And currently the way the billing model is designed is actively antagonistic to the ability to do that for most of the market, which is, why a lot of the innovation happens with these kind of like captive populations.
Very true. And like when it comes to selling, how did you find out what was genuine and like what wasn't genuine when, for example, like finding that PMF that we all want to find? Like, how did you know like there was fake excitement from those providers or like execs, or like it was actually okay, they're going to be ready to pay you?
Oh, I don't think anyone like intentionally fakes excitement. Actually, I think it's, like in general, like I don't think anyone in some ways has the incentive to waste your time or BS you. Just their incentives might not be aligned with yours. But I think it's trying to really understand and take the time to address their core needs. Like for example, like, every major employer today in the US, if you look at the Fortune 100s, I did this kind of back of the envelope. I'm not entirely sure of how quite accurate like this is, but like I think is directionally correct. About half of Fortune 100 companies, their cost of healthcare is over 10% of their EBITDA. Like it is how much they're spending on healthcare is impacting company level profitability. That is the difference between a blowout quarter and a missed quarter, right? Like and it is part like it is the most uncontrolled cost increase in their entire cost stack. And cancer is the biggest chunk of that and accelerating the fastest. Right. And so there it's kind of like understanding that and spending time with these purchasers where it's like, look, this is not just a chief people officer problem. Now it's a CFO and CEO problem from a financial standpoint and business kind of performance level. But then, and in addition, despite the fact that you're paying so much, every single year, you are seeing some of your employees who you care about, whose families you care about, and so on, have these horrible experiences, right? Like you're paying sometimes millions of dollars for a cancer patient, but when you actually look at their treatment, huge mistakes are made. All these opportunities are missed, right? Like, you've been paying all this money for this person and, they haven't gotten their mammogram in 5 years. And now they're showing up with late stage breast cancer. And why is that? Oh, it's because it was inconvenient and they were made to jump through a bunch of hoops. So life got in the way and they missed those opportunities. And now it's like this. And so like understanding that is really the value they're trying to buy. That's an example of like, I think where, really kind of understanding and selling like that value as opposed to you have a widget, right? Like because everyone makes widgets, and like the question is like, what is the, what's your kind of like business prerogative, if you will.
Do you guys work with Moffitt overall, or like Moffitt Cancer Center?
Yeah, well, actually, I'm not sure the kind of whether we do. I know that I mean, we know a bunch of folks at Moffitt, and we kind of refer people in and so on. So, I believe actually we might have actually some people on our kind of extended referral network and so on who are Moffitt. I should check. I mean, I know a bunch of folks at Moffitt, but like the kind of I'm not sure about like whether we have any kind of like formal structure there or not. But
Yeah, the reason I asked is because it's so close to me, and they are always looking for new novel tools to kind of
yeah,
help comes to, helping their cancer patients overall in multiple different aspects to kind of think about. I mean, but in your case specifically, like were there any alterations that you had to make, when it comes to the business model based on your customers' incentives? And if so, like what models have you had to change and how did that look?
yeah. I mean, one of the examples was kind of how you think about pricing, and again, there too, like I think really trying to keep that north star. That's like, how do you create a pricing model that doesn't create adverse incentives, right? Like you want to, really not incentivize, because even if you say okay, because like I think one thing you is important not to trick oneself with is like sometimes you'll have a pricing structure that taken on its own um, incentivizes things that are misaligned with your customer. But then you're like, well, no, but trust us, we're good people and we're better than the others. And the reality is like, like there's a gravitational pull towards incentives and there's always rationalizations, and you kind of like that kind of like it causes like a drifting that is not ideal. And so like one of the things that we've iterated on and can always continue iterating on is trying to align our economics with those of everyone we work with, so that like there is no scenario where we're doing great and they're not getting the outcome that they wanted. So I think that's one place where, and again, with pricing is actually one of those things that's actually, it always looks very simple when you kind of take a step, look at any kind of current pricing design and you're like, well, that's easy. It's like you said, like, okay, you have three things you bill for, but uh, I think that's one thread that is, I think, quite important and where you can go very deep in and iterate on. And I feel like every time, we think through it, at the beginning, I'm like, well, the answer is very clear and simple and, whatever. And like, and then we keep pressure testing, et cetera. It's like you unpack and you're like, wow, like actually like there's all these different ways in which you can optimize, because also you want to make things very as simple as possible, because also complexity, the other thing that happens is like with pricing, complexity also opens flanks for misalignment. And so complex pricing models, and that's kind of, for example, Medicare Advantage pricing design. By pricing, I mean like if you add in the HEDIS and star measures and this and that, like there's all these like knobs and et cetera. What ends up happening is that when you have a game that's too complicated for people to grok and understand, and the optimal game ends up to play the game of the rules, not to play the spirit of the game, right? And so, and I think that's a big trap that oftentimes happens with pricing and structures like that. And unfortunately, I think that is like, one of the biggest issues in, the value-based care world is like the way you succeed in value-based care is not by actually living better care, is by playing the game. And, every week you see a lawsuit of like some plan settling with the government for fraud because like they're just playing the game, the rules, not the spirit of the rules. And then at some point the music stops on it, and it's always a cat and mouse. And like, so I think that's one place where really striving for simplicity, and alignment is hard, but is important. I think that's, probably one of the big ones that is sometimes underappreciated, but, has a very big impact.
So why did you start Color at the first place? I believe you and Elad started Color way back then. What was the whole point of getting into it?
Yeah. I mean, I never thought honestly I'd work in the healthcare space, but what, like so I have a fair amount of cancer history in my family. My grandmother had passed away from breast cancer. My mother is a two-time breast cancer survivor. And we're both carriers of a mutation gene called BRCA2 or BRCA2. And that had given me interest in, the link between cancer and genetics. So that was initially more of a personal curiosity and interest. And right at that time, around like 2012, 2013, the cost of sequencing was going down. There's a lot of interest in genetics, and also like genetics is part of healthcare where it's very software driven. And so as an engineer, there was, I think, a lot of like really interesting software problems within that. So that was the initial kind of curiosity and interest, and and then one thing led to another.
Has that been pretty hard, like, throughout, seeing your life, your mom going through cancer, your grandmother dying, going through breast cancer, unfortunately passing away, like, has that been hard? Like, how has that been in a more of a family setting?
Yeah, I mean, like for sure, but when every family has things going on, and challenges, and that they encounter, and and that's been, I think, the one of the lessons over time is we've been going through this journey with color, is like you realize it touches everyone, right? Like every single person, has a meaningful health stories, whether it's like neurodegenerative health, or cancer, or mental health, or cardiometabolic issues, and so on. And so I think that the thing that you realize over time too is like there's no silver bullet, right? Like we're all mortal, we're all gonna die eventually, and etc. But for you realize too that we're so fortunate to live at a time where we have incredible safety, incredible amount of tools at our disposal, and it's really a shame when we have things that work and that are available, but are not accessible to people. And so, you know, trying to use technology to address that, right? Like I think is just an amazing opportunity. So I think that's really what, motivates me, and, everyone in the color team, is like, every week, I mean, we will have patients and their families or employers, reach out and thank us for making a very big difference for them and their families, right? Like when that like there are some people who are going to be, having a Thanksgiving with their family this year that wouldn't have without your work. That's means a lot. So
And, what does the future of cancer care look like on the consumer and like the health system level? Like, what is
yeah,
it like going into it?
I mean, I think like actually, I mean, obviously, I'm very biased based on what we're doing, but like, I think the virtual cancer clinic model is one of these things where like, the more we've been working on it, the more it's been like crystallizing as we realize that it's the same thing as the internet and technologies had on the rest of our lives. Like, when in the early internet days, when Amazon started selling books, we were like, it's like, okay, I can buy books, but I'll never buy like something expensive, or I'll never buy clothes or whatever. And now it's like, I haven't bought, I've almost never bought any clothes in a store in a decade. And I think with healthcare, it's also kind of like that. And I think even with cancer, because people think of cancer as being like, oh, it's chemo and surgeries. But like actually cancer is something that spans a person's entire life in very different facets, whether it's survivorship, whether it's prevention, and even during treatment. And more of that is lending itself to a distributed model. And that over time, that works in tandem with the physical settings, whether it's big cancer centers or independent infusion sites and so on. And so like, I think my vision for cancer is like the biggest cancer center, in 10 years is not going to be a brick and mortar cancer center. It is going to be a virtual cancer center that is global and that serves a global population and is technology first and AI driven. And that works with the amazing institutions all over the world. But it's kind of how with data centers, right? Like we all used to run data centers, but over time you have hyperscalers. And I think that is a similar trajectory. I think that will happen for cancer and for other major disease areas. I think similar for cardiometabolic health, mental health, et cetera, is like these are all things that are going to be distributed first services rather than tied to, a physical set of buildings.
I mean, we've also seen on the consumer side so many of the patients, or not even patients, but people just like you and I scared of AI, right? Like it's maybe it could be bad marketing on like the large organizations, but how can we get more patients to be more proactive about care and maybe leverage AI to their best capability?
I don't think it's actually a patient problem. It's kind of interesting. Healthcare is one of the top use cases in Gemini and OpenAI and Anthropic. People are already heavily using AI and reveling in the fact that it's like they're getting better information from these AI tools than they're getting from their doctor. And it's not because their doctors are bad people or not smart. It's just because like the amount of attention and context that these tools can have for you is orders of magnitude more than an individual with any talent level can have in a 15-minute encounter. Right. And so like, I think like the consumers are actually going to pull us into the AI world. Like we're already seeing it. Like I'll give you one example. And this is not a consumer pull, but like today, maybe like 0.5% of any cancer patient gets their treatment reviewed by a tumor board, which a tumor board is a multidisciplinary team that reviews every case to make sure that it's properly understood and they get the right treatment. And it's a tiny percentage. Thanks to AI and our model, like 100% of cancer patients that Color works with get tumor board review, right? And that is fundamentally enabled by technology, right? And so, like, I think that's the kind of thing that, like, I think healthcare is going to be completely transformed in this next wave. And I think consumers, like, when all the FUD and the kind of et cetera, honestly, is more people who have more to lose in the change. And there's a lot of, and obviously, like, safety is important, privacy is important. There's like a lot of important things to address. But I don't think, like, I think a lot of the fear is perception by people who their personal health is not on the line.
Mhm.
And so it's their business model that's on the line more than their health. When people's health is on the line, they're very willing to use these tools. So that's a,
I mean, kind of going back to like founders and then kind of startups here, like what is one trait that you've seen? And I know you're an angel investor yourself. Like how do you like usually angel invest? Like what are common traits that you look for in founders in those early years? And like what is
yeah,
like a piece of advice that you wish every founder has?
yeah. I mean, I think three things. I think one super important is integrity. And integrity, I mean, like, like willingness to do the work and be rigorous and not bullshit. Like things are hard and like you don't have all the answers. So you should be okay to say you don't have all the answers, but willing to kind of roll up your sleeves and really dig into it. Like I think that's super important in spaces like healthcare. I think number two is that you have to be willing to be like, I'm not at all interested. Like there are a lot of people who've founded like successful startups taking advantage of the system, like people coming out of big payers, et cetera, who are like, oh, I'm going to do the HEDIS measures, or RAF coding company, all the RCM stuff. Like I have zero personal interest in that. Again, I think there are good revenue opportunities there. Personally, I have zero interest in that. Like, I think that's kind of like, I just want to be part of like making the world better, not, taking advantage of the system. And so that's, I think number two. But then number three, I think is also being willing to break the mold and question fundamental assumptions and iterate, right? Like, and the thing I tell people is like in healthcare, you have to be willing to iterate a lot. And there are a lot of easier places to make money than in healthcare as an entrepreneur. If you're a tech entrepreneur, I mean, every week I get like tech people who are like, oh, I want to do something in healthcare. I'm like, okay, like, just so you know, like if your primary goal when you dig into like, your personal, like what do you want really, really in your heart of hearts, if what you want is to just play with like build cool technology and make something that's economically successful, healthcare is not the easiest place to do that. It's like playing in hard mode, right? Like, you set at a game and you're like, to dial up difficulty level. I think healthcare is just harder. And so you have to have this additional reason. Your utility function needs to have a personal connection to what you're doing uh, to make it worth your time. So it's kind of like at least how I think
That was
about it.
great. Kind of going to a quick rapid fire here. Like, what is like the single biggest barrier stopping most people from getting screened for cancer today?
Friction is just like lack of immediacy. I don't think you need to scare them. I don't think you need to cajole them or pay them or bribe them. I think it's really just kind of like making it a one click kind of thing. I think that's the most important thing. Yeah.
If you could snap your fingers right now and fix one thing in the US healthcare, what is that?
I would deal with the vertical integration problem that we have, similar to like the fact that insurance companies are also running networks and running healthcare services. I think that's a real problem. It's not because they're bad people, et cetera. It's like I think it just creates an incentive structure that impedes a free market model. And I personally really believe in free markets as a way to create value and create great solutions. And I think that's a really fundamental impediment. Yeah.
What do you do in your free time? I know you have 3 boys, so I know it's probably accumulated with your boys.
We play a lot. I love cycling, so I cycle a lot. So I think if I was retired, I'd just probably be on the road most of my time. So,
Yeah. I mean, dude, it's
and I love programming, so I probably would be just like hacking and cycling. That's my.
well, how has your programming changed over time now with Claude Code and
Oh, it's
Cursor?
amazing. Like I had kind of like, especially, I mean, for example, like, by now Color has a huge code base. If you're not coding in it every day, it's really hard to, do anything useful. But now I think with these tools, it makes it much easier to prototype things and to, get involved and so on. And like, I think it's actually, for me, it's been actually an amazing way to do more, like where it's like, because I was finding like when you're not like programming every day, just getting your environment to work and doing the basic things, right? Like to kind of like you spend most of your time like doing the glue stuff as opposed to the building the ideas, the core of the idea when you're out of practice. And now I think that it really helps with that.
Yeah.
Sometimes the chagrin of people on the team, because I show up with all these prototypes and they're like, oh my God, here we go.
You you like vibe code? I mean, I know we're kinda going can you vibe code in healthcare, like an app, like a startup, to make, like, a healthcare application that providers can use? Do you think that we're at the stage where that can be possible? Or do we still need, like, an outside development source, like a CTO or, like, someone to outsource the development? Or can we just actually, like, right now, vibe code
But
healthcare?
yeah, I pause. I have to drop in a minute, but like, yeah,
Yeah,
I think that the way I think about it is like, obviously in healthcare, like you're not going to use all of it and like, just whip something together in 5 minutes on Replit and launch it and be like, okay, this is HIPAA compliant because it won't be. So like, but for example, like we have completely changed how we build new features in a lot of parts of the company where we will very rapidly iterate with tools like Replit, for example, to explore a bunch of different ideas and how they can work and so on. And it enables us to kind of like really kind of build much higher quality products and experiences. And then there's the path to translating that into production code. And there too, actually, we do use AI tools for that as well. So I think that like term vibe coding, probably I think is going to, I would expect it to go by the wayside in the sense of like, I think that the way people think about it, like the image again is like, oh, you're going to YOLO something into production, which is
yeah.
not going to be the case, right? Like, so,
Yeah.
so yeah.
Dude, it's amazing to have you on the show. Thank you so much. I truly enjoy this, and I can literally speak with you so
Thanks for
for
the
hours.
time. Great
I
to
truly
connect.
appreciate this.
Oh, absolute pleasure.